Alright, so the elephant in the room, so to speak, for Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau has always been what to do with the sequel trilogy, as it's absolutely horrible and, quite honestly, not Star Wars. What they're doing is Star Wars. Jon Favreau seems to have finally addressed that, or accurately, I guess, addressed it again, as he's kind of covered this before, but there may be an out. Stick around to the end of the video for that. Alright, so Jon and Dave were being interviewed by Yahoo Entertainment, and they were fed the question of, they had stated previously, which is correct, that The Mandalorian was the middle chapter in a larger story, which they then quickly clarified with a couple comments, specifically this one. The middle chapters to a much larger story. Well, I think middle might mean I hope I do a lot more. We know we've got about 30 years to play in the sandbox before we have established lore. Alright, let's break this down because there's a lot being said in a very little amount. Or is there? I know that sounds ridiculous, but just bear with me. So first and foremost, everyone has been speculating that they could easily get rid of the sequel trilogy, and there's different mechanisms for doing that. The most common, of course, is they just grab the old Deus Ex Machina of the world beyond worlds and have Ahsoka or Ezra or Mando, somebody change the future. You know, they did it once, they could do it again. Pretty simple. That's the most common one. I really don't see them going that route. It's a little too simplistic. A second option, which is an interesting one, is that for reasons unknown, Luke decides to use the Force to look into the future. Of course, it's been established you don't get really clear-cut black and white. All he's got to do is catch a glimpse of someone killing a bunch of his students, and he makes the decision to no longer train the student. There's a third that probably would be the most interesting. Don't necessarily know if they're going to do this or not, and that is in the final season of The Mandalorian, and you would have to have a big established baddie. Thrawn would be the obvious choice. You have to pull Luke in, and he ends up sacrificing himself to save Grogu, and then you either have just the simple fact that Luke's dead, so he can't possibly train his people in the future, or he asks Grogu to train Jedi in the future. There's a lot of different things. Okay, so you stuck around through all that. I do appreciate it. Those are the possibilities that have been thrown out. And there's even been the idea that Favreau is saying this now because he doesn't want to ruffle any feathers until such time as Kathleen Kennedy is completely out of the picture. Kathleen Kennedy seems to be a boogeyman for a lot of these discussions. They also attribute her with a lot more power than I think she has. She is moving out of her role, and that will free up some. But in all reality, I don't think that Favreau or Filoni have to do anything at all. And I say that from the standpoint that not only Disney, but many studios right now are still grappling with the idea and the concept of how do we make money from streaming. It is not enough just to have millions of people paying a monthly fee, because you can't equate, or at least successfully equate, or financially equate, I guess is the best term, that this particular show equates to this much money. So yes, they can easily say, oh, The Mandalorian's our top show because it's billions of minutes or hours watched, whatever you want to say. That's great, but you don't have any metric that says because of those billions of hours watched, we made $100 million. People that are subscribed that are watching The Mandalorian, maybe not, watching 5, 10, 1, 2, 100 other Disney shows on Disney+. It's the nature of streaming. Theaters have become a real headache. So post-COVID, theater attendance dropped off a cliff. It takes something extraordinarily special to achieve the former heights and glories of the theater. That would be the last Spider-Man movie, that would be Top Gun Maverick, and that would be Avatar Way of the Water. Those made $1 billion. And when your budgets for films are 200, 250, possibly creeping up on 300 mil these days, and you add in marketing, distribution, everything else, you need that $1 billion, not to break even, but to make back a substantial amount of money. Because again, it isn't enough on a $300 million movie to make back $5 million or even $50 million. You really need that big, huge bang for the buck. This is part of the reason why they've delayed the Star Wars films, the next sequel trilogy. You keep hearing about it, but it keeps being put off. They've even sort of said, well, we might just test the waters and throw out a Star Wars movie that's not part of a trilogy. because they're waiting to see if the theaters are going to come back. It is to my eternal horror, regret, and sadness that most likely they're not. And of course, the irony being, streaming is killing the drive or desire to go back to the theaters. So what's the metric they can use? And this is what is really going to determine what Filoni and Favreau have to do. Now, I don't pretend to know exactly, because I don't know how the financial machinations work. What I do know this: the number one thing that studios can use and have used in the past to not determine success, but to make money, is merchandising. If they could create a property that sells merchandise, they have a revenue stream that in often cases far exceeds the original. The merchandise for the original Star Wars film far outperformed the box office. With that in mind, think about it. You can't throw a rock outside without hitting a piece of Grogu merchandise. The Mandalorian is the cash cow, the measurable cash cow for Disney Plus. And I think that is going to be what determines things in the future. And so with all that being said, what does it have to do with the sequel trilogy? What it has to do with the sequel trilogy is this. The sequel trilogy, the merchandising was a complete and utter failure. Now the movies made a lot of money. Not going to discount that. But the merchandising was a complete and utter failure. News story after news story of crap sitting on the shelves. So get this. I know it sounds like a cop-out, a bit of a letdown. But fundamentally, Filoni and Favreau don't have to do anything except continue to produce good material. That will relegate the sequel trilogy to obscurity and insignificance. Because quite honestly, I know it's not an apples-to-apples comparison, but think about this. The original Star Wars Holidays, abysmal, hated, poorly rated. It barely registers a blip on the collective consciousness. It's kind of a butt of a joke. And so realistically speaking, it will not surprise me in the least bit if consistently good quality is produced by Filoni and Favreau, and possibly people to come after them. In 20 years from now, 30 years from now, the sequel trilogy would very well be looked upon as a joke, as insignificant, as a mistake. Now, again, these are just my thoughts and opinions. I know it's really far-fetched, so I would like to know what you guys think. Let's talk about it. Obey your king. Subscribe to the channel and click the notification icon.